Hey, how's it going, guys? Welcome back to another PS5 video. So it looks like we've had some pretty major news, which is the release of the new Lapse kernel exploit for the PS5, using of course the Lua exploit as the entry point to trigger that kernel exploit. So we now have that chain working on the PS5. It also works on the PS4, although it's not quite fully implemented yet on the PS4. So the PS4 version is lagging a little bit behind the PS5 version right now. But on PS5, we essentially have it working on firmwares all the way from 8.00 all the way up to firmware 10.01. So any firmware in between 8.00 all the way up to 10.01, including also older firmwares below 8.00 that already have existing jailbreaks. We can also run the new Lapse kernel exploit on those firmwares too. So that is all basically implemented and ready to go here. Now we're just talking right now about the Lapse kernel exploit itself, which on its own can only enable the debug settings right now. And obviously, you know, it essentially jailbreaks the system, but we don't have case stuff to be able to run fake packages or, you know, PS5 game backups or homebrew or anything like that at the moment. We're just talking about enabling the debug settings up to 10.01. There's also the ELF loader, which is trying to be ported at the moment, and it is working, I believe, on 8.00, possibly 8.20, just not too sure about that right now. But there definitely seems to be some changes that have been implemented in firmwares at least above 8.0, potentially 8.20, so basically 8.40 and above, that are running into issues at the moment with trying to get the ELF loader working. So we can see this from EchoStretch here. He made a post saying that with all the screenshots, videos, and messages going around, trust me when I say something changed from 8.20 to 8.40 plus. We're currently working on it, so please do not update for now. Also, avoid taking advice from untrusted sources. So obviously I would second that, but especially the whole thing about do not update. Obviously you should not update, you know, even if the ELF loader was working up to 10.01 right now, because we don't have K stuff, and we still don't know if K stuff can be successfully ported on these higher firmwares, because there could be, you know, some kind of change that PlayStation have implemented to kind of firm up the security to prevent something like K stuff from actually working. So we need to, obviously you should wait until you essentially have K stuff and ETA hen all working on those higher firmwares before you would consider updating to one of those higher firmwares. And then even then there are reasons not to update in case you want to wait for a hypervisor exploit and, you know, other reasons like that. So it remains to be seen at the moment if this change that is preventing the ELF loader from being ported right now to 8.20 potentially, or 8.40 and higher, could be, you know, some kind of extra security measure that's going to be hard to get around, or if it might just be something fairly trivial that they'll be able to figure out quite quickly and get around. So that still remains to be seen. So fingers crossed it's something trivial and not something very complicated like some kind of new security measure that is preventing it. Because obviously the ELF loader is needed to load payloads, like your eventually K stuff, if it gets ported successfully, will need to be loaded with the ELF loader, along with, you know, pretty much everything else. Other payloads and homebrew applications need to be loaded with the ELF loader. It's a vital component, so that will need to be figured out so it can be ported on these higher firmwares. So the ELF loader is working right now on 8.00, but looks like firmwares above that may be having trouble getting the ELF loader working right now, so it's currently not available on those higher firmwares. But the kernel exploit on its own will work up to 10.01 so far, which will just enable the debug settings for now. So in order to get this up and running here, you need to download the Lua loader from this project. This whole thing was ported by SharrelNet and NullPointer. And of course, I think EchoStretch was working on porting all of the offsets. So as you can see, you need to get the save data copied over. If you're using an older version of the remote Lua loader, you will need to update to this latest version, which includes the offsets for the higher firmwares. So make sure that you install the latest save data for the remote Lua loader. I do have a couple of videos on this, one that shows the easy way of restoring a backup, although there might not be a backup available yet with the latest version, because at the time of recording it was only 6 hours ago that 9.xx offsets were added. So I'd keep an eye on updates from Master S9 on the backups, because Master S9 is usually the person that comes out with the latest backups that you can restore on your console. So I'm sure there'll be a backup available soon that you can use to restore the save data onto your console for this latest version. There are other ways that you can also copy the file over. I'll leave a couple of guides that I've made on that down in the video description if you want to check it out to get the save data on your console. And then if we take a look at the payloads, we can see that we have the lapse.lua file here, which runs the kernel exploit. If we take a look at it, it says kernel exploit for PS5 for firmwares below or equal to 10.01 and PS4s on firmwares below or equal to 12.02. And then also on PS5, it will jailbreak the game process as well as the PlayStation, allowing for more access to the system. On the PS4, it will only give arbitrary kernel read-write for the vulnerable firmware. Jailbreaking for PS4 is not yet available. So yes, it does not quite work yet on the PS4. I mean, actually, the exploit itself does run on the PS4. I have tested it. But as you'll see here, if I launch the game on the PS4, a Lua game that can run the remote Lua loader, when I try to send the Lua file payload here, you can see it does actually run the kernel exploit just fine, but it does say here that it's not supported yet for the jailbreak. So, you know, it just kind of stops at a certain point and doesn't go any further. So that's what you get right now if you try to run it on the PS4. It's just a little bit further behind the PS5, not quite fully implemented yet, but certainly being worked on. And if you want to try and run this on the PS5, I just tested this on my 4.03 system, since you can run it on firmwares that have previous jailbreaks as well. So with this, I already have the save file copied over. So again, I can just launch the game and it will run the remote Lua loader, listening on port 9026. And then from there, we can simply go into the payloads folder that contains all the Lua payloads. We right click in that folder and open a terminal window. And then from there, we can simply type in Python and then the send_lua.py, which is the script to send the Lua files to the console. And then the IP address of your PS5, followed by 9026, which is the port number. And then obviously we're going to send the lapse.lua file instead of the UMTX one to try and jailbreak using this new exploit. And as you can see, when I press enter, it's pretty much instant. It's amazing how fast this runs. It definitely loads faster than the UMTX exploit, although that too runs pretty fast with this particular method. But even then, this is definitely faster. Not quite 100% stable though. As you can see, in this case, on my first try, it did run successfully, and it gets all the way to the point where it says it's done. Once it's done, you can then send a follow-up payload like the ELF loader if it's supported on your firmware right now. Obviously, I'm on an older jailbreak, so I have all payloads available to me. So I can go ahead and send the ELF loader next, again using the same script, and then that will get the ELF loader loaded on my console. And then finally, last but not least, because again, I'm on an older firmware that has ETA hen support, I can also then just use netcat GUI or any other payload injector to essentially send the ETA hen payload on port 9021, and the ELF loader will launch it on the PS5 and get the console fully jailbroken with ETA hen. So I can basically run the full exploit and get ETA hen up and running using the new Lapse exploit on my PS5 right now, which is pretty damn awesome. Now, obviously, stability is not perfect, so I only tried to load this 3 times so far. The first time I loaded it, it was successful. The second time I tried to load it, it failed, it was unsuccessful. And if you try and load it again after it fails, because it doesn't necessarily kernel panic when it fails, so you can go on and try and load it again, but then it will most likely just kernel panic, so you might as well just restart your PS5 when you get that error message, and then just try and load it again. And on my third try, it was successful again. So first try and third try were successful, second try failed. So yeah, 2 out of 3 so far. Obviously, I'd have to try it many more times to really see, you know, what the success and failure rate actually is. So in terms of how this actually changes the whole status quo of jailbreaking on the PS5, as of right now, the current situation, basically up to firmware 8.0, you're able to enable the debug settings and also run the ELF loader, which means in a pretty short period of time, I suspect things like the homebrew launcher will get updated to support 8.00. So you'll be able to load some of those retro games, the offline account activator, maybe things like the remote play enabler, those kind of homebrew applications could run. And then also, of course, other payloads like FTP for root access to the file system. And maybe eventually things like PS5 debug, AirPSX, various other payloads could get ported over to work on 8.00. Those are things that we could expect in the short term. Obviously, long term, we'll have to wait and see if K-Stuff will be able to be ported to firmwares above 7.61. That still remains to be seen. And for firmwares above 8.00 and maybe 8.20, we're looking at an issue with the ELF loader where it's not working at the moment, and we'll have to see if that can be successfully fixed and made to work on all of the firmwares up to 10.01. So that's still a wait and see situation right there. Now, there could also be some short-term benefits to people on 6.x and 7.x firmwares who already have existing jailbreaks, because I've noticed that EchoStretch has also been updating the offsets for the PS5 self-decryptor, which is used to decrypt your games so that you can create PS5 game backups or game dumps. So those offsets are being updated to add 8.x, 9.x, and 10.0 and 10.01 firmware support to the self-decryptor. Obviously, it requires the ELF loader to be able to load it, which means only people on 8.0.0 would be able to load it in the immediate term. Even though we don't have K-Stuff on 8.x or anything yet, you could still decrypt your retail games on an 8.x firmware with this updated self-decryptor if you have a working ELF loader available by that point. And then you could essentially dump your games on those higher firmwares that are currently not runnable on 6.x and 7.x firmwares. You could turn them into playable game dumps, and then people on 6.x and 7.x would be able to run them using K-Stuff. So people on 6.x and 7.x could look forward to newer games, more PS5 game dumps being made available in the short term. And then of course we also want to see the PS4 get full support for the exploit as well, so that we can jailbreak our PS4s fully using this Lua version of the exploit as well. So yeah, anyway, that's basically where we are right now. So hope you guys enjoyed this video or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And once again, I'll hopefully see you guys in the next one.